Mysteries of the Mind, and I am your host, Sarah Soderlund. It's been kind of fun. We're like 5 minutes short starting because we are doing a show on audio expertise, and we're struggling with our Skype audio and getting our guest on. So I wanted to introduce the show and then take a quick break, bring on our guest, who I'm extremely excited to have on the show. And just to jump right into it, tonight's topic is the fear frequency. And I kind of have to give you the backstory, and I'll give you the reach around, if you will. The short version of this is that I have two sons, my firstborn, whose name is Stellan, and he's 3 years old now. And ever since he was born, we were a little nervous that he was going to have some type of a hearing impairment, because hearing issues run in my family and they run in my husband's family. My husband was actually deaf for the first 8 to 9 months of his life before he had any hearing at all. So we were kind of wondering, if Stellan was going to be okay. Of course, they do that infant hearing test. He passed, but we were always kind of cautiously watching. And he had some strange behaviors, one of which being around airplanes. He was terrified of airplanes and terrified of noises it seemed like that we could never hear. Things that were absolutely terrifying to him that no one else was aware of. Me, as someone who works in parapsychology, was always trying to not diagnose, but observe and figure it out and pinpoint what it was that I could do, because as a parent, you want to help your child. And it wasn't until just recently that I stumbled upon something that I had heard of before. I had heard of it before in paranormal investigating. I had heard of it before in parapsychology, and I had heard of it before working in our home studio. My husband's a musician, but I'd never put it all together. It was like having toast and jam and peanut butter, but it was never quite the sandwich of clarity until just recently, this past Christmas. My son Stellan has this aversion to one particular song, and I couldn't understand. Maybe it was the synthesizer. Maybe he just didn't like it. It was kind of a scary sounding song, and we're going to play one of them here on the first break. But he was terrified. You would turn on this song and he would instantly collapse to the floor. He would instantly curl up in the fetal position and start shaking, banging his hands over his ears, screaming, "Turn it off, turn it off." It was the same reaction he'd had to airplanes. It was the same reaction he'd had a few times in conjunction with night terrors. And it's really fearful to watch. It's really scary. But over Christmas, of course, now he's had this boom in his language where he's really able to tell you exactly what's going on. And he explained that every time he does that, it's something in the song. Something in the song is very scary. And he uses the word scary, frightening. It's terrifying, Mom. It's terrifying. Turn it off. We thought, okay, we're just never going to play that song around Stellan again. Well, my husband has recently done a new series of music for the Shannara Chronicles, and there's a song in there that's very epic. And of course, at Christmas time, where usually we would be passing around the headphones, it's a big group of people standing around eating and munching on Christmas appetizers, and we decide to play it over the loudspeaker and kind of say, hey, this is the new song if you've not heard it. And over there in the corner, happily playing with his toys, the moment the song comes on, he collapses. Stellan starts shaking like a seizure, banging his head against the floor, screaming, and everyone stops and is staring. Well, my husband and I know to turn off the music, and the moment we turn off the music, he's fine. My husband says, that's funny, I used that same synthesizer sound in that previous song he doesn't like. I wonder if it's the synthesizer. Well, I stayed up late that night because I couldn't sleep, thinking, what exactly could be going on with my son? And that's when I stumbled upon the fear frequency. Now, Mythbusters on the Discovery Channel has covered this before, and previous documentaries on the History Channel and the Nat Geo Channel have also covered this in some of their paranormal investigations or mysteries, and they're always very inconclusive. Well, tonight I'm going to be bringing on a guest, Mr. Michael Esposito, who's not only an EVP and audio specialist, but he's my go-to person. He's my little black book contact for when I have questions about anything audio related. And I just have to say, when I emailed him about this concept, his response was so full of information, I couldn't help but say, I'm sorry, but you've got to be on my next show. Would you be willing and able and give me the honor of being on Mysteries of the Mind? And he said, you know what? This is really passionate to me. It really rung close to him as someone growing up with hearing issues and working in the field that he does. And so he's joining us tonight for New Year's for this very special holiday edition of Mysteries of the Mind. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cut to a break now. I've got one of these songs that was the instigator for tonight's show. And I'm going to let my producer play those. And when we come back from the break here on Mysteries of the Mind, we're going to be talking with, again, my very favorite, Mr. Michael Esposito. response that my 3-year-old son has when he hears those clips. But again, those pieces were by my husband, and it's bizarre. And so that's why I wanted to bring on, who is now joining us just 20 minutes into the show, so we're going to steal him for the remaining time that we have here, Mr. Michael Esposito. Can you hear me?
Yes, finally.
Yes, finally. I'm telling you, we were haunted. Those of you listening, we were like chasing each other in the Matrix, and something wasn't working. There was some conspiracy against it. But we are bringing Michael on the show tonight because, and Michael, I don't know if you have an aversion to the label of EVP audio expert or specialist. It's kind of how I've been referring to you all week. But how do you refer to yourself? Can you give everyone kind of a short bio to what it is that makes you extraordinarily amazing and my go-to person?
You're too kind. Yeah, I research electronic voice phenomena and sound in general, and I record EVP and the environments that I capture them in and build them into compositions, and often perform them or use them in performances. And I put out records and cassettes and CDs and flexi records. And
well, because not only are your audio pieces amazing, I don't want to use, there's some other people out there who've kind of claimed to create the EVP genre, which is totally not true. I think anyone who's been following you in your work or has seen your lectures knows that you've been doing this for some time, and music is a big part of your life. But also, I remember having first met you in 2008, and I was amazed, everyone listening, because usually when you go to a paranormal conference or you're at some particular location, people are there kind of on guided tours. They're there for an experience of some kind, but very, very very little do you find people that are there actually doing research that, is validated by the scientific community and that is contributing something to the parapsychological realm. So for me, my little feelers went out, my little antennas perked up when I came upon Michael Esposito at, I think it was South Pittsburgh is where we were. And you were doing some amazing recreation type things.
Right,
you were playing
frequencies, yeah.
Right. You were playing these different frequencies and trying to see what the responses were, and you were there recreating, cardiac machines and the EKG machines and all these different sounds, and it was really instigating some interesting activity. And I was floored because I was there doing binaural beat research for psychology purposes, and I was like, holy cow, this dude is the dude. So I was just really excited to have met you. It was very serendipitous, if you will, at that time in my life. And so I always kind of randomly am sending Michael Esposito my audio things. When I have clients that are speaking strange languages, or I think things are flipped, or I think there's, some strange audio phenomenon, he's always my go-to person. But for tonight's show specifically, it was cool because, of course, I had this question, and I'm like, okay, I have an audio question. I'm sending it to Michael. And I sent you this email, and I'm always secretly hoping that you'll respond. And you did. And you responded with this email that, again, was just like, this is why you're in my life. This is why I was meant to email you, is because your response was so informative, and it was so useful to me as a parent who was experiencing this strange phenomenon with my son and kind of needing some advice. But also, I think for anybody in the paranormal community or even in the mental health community, because we have a large demographic of listeners who are psychologists as well. But when people start to exhibit these strange symptoms, it may not mean that they're mentally ill. It may not mean that they need an exorcism. But instead, it could just be the body's physical response to a stimulus that we are not all aware is around us. And the fear frequency, dun, 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 is what I wanted to talk with you about tonight. So when I sent you that email, what was your initial kind of thought? What came to mind? Because, of course, I've read your email response, so I know all of the information that you have. But for those, what do you have when you hear someone say the fear frequency, or 19 hertz specifically, that range just below the human range of hearing. What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's, first I'd like to comment. Yeah, there are a lot of serious researchers out there in the world, and those are not usually the ones you find on television. Hans Kenneth out of the Netherlands, Mark Macy, of course, and a lot of the World ITC people. So there's a lot of real serious researchers out there. It's almost a different genre than the ghost hunters, of the funhouse
Right,
kind
it's
of
less entertainment.
persuasion. Sure. And when you send me the email, just going to your direct question, when you send me the email, it's people don't realize that we're subject to a lot of different frequencies we don't actually audibly hear that affect us in different ways. We're also subject to different ailments or different maladies, I guess, if you will, or individualities that make our hearing different. And, I believe your son or daughter, rather, daughter?
Yeah, no, it was my son. Yeah.
Son suffers from tinnitus. And it's something that I suffered with for my entire life. And I noticed certain things about my hearing that, when I was a young child, I remember watching tube televisions that were turned off and just listening to the sounds that were coming out of them, or watching test patterns. I used to have this, oddly enough, I still have this strange affinity for test patterns. I've got a folder collection of pictures of test patterns. I have this strange obsession with test patterns, because when I was younger, I would sit and watch test patterns before programming began. Back in the days when they actually went off the air on programming,
Yeah.
But when someone suffers from tinnitus, one of the things that they do, and because we're adaptable human beings are adaptable, is they work around the tinnitus, the ringing, the frequency range that they're constantly hearing, and they literally learn to listen around it, and to the point where it's been researched and documented that a lot of people who suffer from tinnitus hear things that people who don't suffer from it can't hear. I mean, actually hear everything from music to words to sounds that aren't registered by people who don't suffer from tinnitus. It's like a blind person sharpening other senses.
Well, and what I thought was really interesting was that when you had, in the email response, when I had kind of mentioned that my son, one of which you hear screaming in the background, was struggling with like these responses where he would bang his hands against his ears and was screaming. Now, as a young kid, before he could speak, we didn't know what was going on,
Right.
and I was really fearful to tell doctors because I didn't want them to be running a bunch of tests. I was kind of hoping, because it didn't seem serious. My intuition didn't, tell me that there was anything majorly wrong, but just that there was something else that I wasn't able to experience. But that when he started talking, then kind of like you said, he specifically would say things to me like, do you hear this? And I'm not hearing anything. And now when you say tinnitus, I think that's interesting because that makes me think of my father who's got hearing loss. And
Mm-hmm.
he has that range of hearing where he hears really, really high pitched things, but he
Right.
doesn't hear the low range. So cars will drive by, or like things will happen, or like the lawnmower, he doesn't hear those noises, but he can hear crickets really far away that no one else can hear, or he can hear these strange sounds that no one else can hear. And he had explained it as a tinnitus, but to me, not having any other experience, I thought tinnitus was a defect of hearing.
Well, right. In fact, when you mentioned the hearing loss, I had to think for a second, because you know, many doctors, many physicians, many mainline, I guess, researchers would claim tinnitus is actually a hearing loss or a hearing defective. And in reality, it could be just a different structure of hearing. In other words, you know, like your father who could hear all these sounds that people that didn't have that, I don't even want to call it an affliction. I just want, you know, that set of abilities, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, you know, can't hear them. So, you know, so is it possible that labeling people with tinnitus as a defect or an illness is maybe almost incorrect?
Well, and
You know,
I think it is because even when after having read your email, I had kind of generally talked to some family because hearing issues run in the family, and I was specifically interested in like my husband's line and asking my mother-in-law um, and then again rereading your email when you had mentioned listening to the test card and the test patterns and
right.
sitting in front of the television with it off and still hearing things, which, you know, you get like this poltergeist feeling, you know, like Carolyn, but,
Very,
but you're not, you know, you're not, it's nothing paranormal. There's nothing wrong with, there's not a mental illness there, but it's fantastically interesting because my son does the same thing to like vents, heating vents and,
mm,
air ducts.
air
And
ducts, furnaces, you know,
right.
sure, I would listen, as I would go to sleep every night when I was a kid, I'd listen to the furnace. And it would just so preoccupy me to listen to the air vents and the furnace. That whole system of the house's internal organs, if you would. I would just listen to the complete whole system every night.
Man. Okay, so then this is where it's kind of interesting. For those of you listening, this may or may not sound like an interview to you, but it's more or less me really picking the mind of Mr. Michael Esposito again, joining us here. So as I'm listening to this story, and trust me, as a parent, when you're seeing your child who is like 2 standing over
Right,
a heat vent or a television that's turned off,
right.
talking gibberish and responding like there's an interaction going on, or there's this curiosity where they're listening, their ears perched
Hmm.
to the device. You, I mean, at least in my experience, I'm wondering like, what's what's going on here? Like, it's kind of scary. And I didn't really think a whole lot about it. And I never put two and two and two and two and two together that he also, as a very young child, we would be out like in our stroller and I did my daily walk with him and he would start screaming and crying, like as a baby, screaming and
Hmm.
crying. And then 2 minutes later, an airplane would go overhead. And
Right.
And eventually my husband's like, "Oh yeah, I used to be really scared of butterflies and airplanes too. That's kind of funny." And I was like, "Yeah, but how does he even see them? He's an infant. Like how is he even and he's crying before they come, like a minute before they come." And
Right.
I never realize until I'm reading this email from you, putting all of these small pieces of the puzzle together and being able to, and I hate diagnosing, I hate labeling, but just for language sake, it helps in communicating what's happening. For those of you listening who maybe this has happened to you or to a loved one or to a friend, um, that do you think tinnitus is kind of the word that you would use to describe this? That it's not um, it's not a symptom of defective hearing, but it's the ability to have a larger spectrum or a larger range of hearing wavelength.
Yeah, well, you know, it is. The tinnitus is usually described as the ringing or buzzing in the ear that you constantly can hear if you focus on it. And my friends, I mean, my friends have always played games with me and teased me. And what they would do is a lot of times they would notice, once you got to know me, you would notice a lot of times if you're talking directly, I won't hear a word you're saying, but I'll hear everything around me, including the lights whispers. So what they would do they'd walk, 15 or 20 paces behind me and whisper things about me. And then as I'm walking ahead of them, I'd tell them what they'd said, and it
No
was sort of
way.
oh yeah, it's like a joke they have with me. It's like a game. And they'll do that. And they'll whisper, or
Wow.
whatever. And I'll tell them, I heard that. That's what you said. And they'll laugh and giggle and stuff. And a lot of times if they're talking loudly and directly to me, I'll miss the whole thing.
Okay.
And, yeah.
This is just so fast. It's just so fascinating to me. Like if you could see me here, like perched on my bed here, just kind of, I'm so excited. I'm excited because not only do I think this is helpful to people, but also I think it maybe can prevent misdiagnosis for people. But for me as a parent, it's really helpful in alleviating that sense of, okay, my child's not crazy, or, seeing a ghost or,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
having something like that. Because I think of like these horror stories that you hear of children, or adolescents having struggles with hearing things or maybe that ringing or that buzzing, because I don't know what that's like. I imagine can probably cause migraines. It can cause confusion. It can cause, that inability to focus, things like ADHD or, frustrations. I mean, if I was hearing something in the back of my head, sitting under the back, row of the classroom because my name is Soderlund and I'm right under that heating vent, that would drive me crazy.
Well, yeah and no. I mean, first with your son, you should try this. Is whisper to him from different parts of the room and stuff, and try that and see if he's not picking it up. I think you'll find he's picking it up. But from your statement, imagine the sun being really bright and looking directly into the sun. Okay, you can't see anything, but if you avert your eyes or shade your eyes and look around, sort of around the direct sunlight, you could see things. Correct?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so when you talk about ADHD, D or the ability to focus or pay attention, what you're really asking people that have this ability or what have you do is to look directly into the sunlight and tell you what they see, which isn't really fair because it doesn't take into account their individuality. Instead of telling them to look directly into the sun or this focus or what you consider or what people who don't have this would consider attention or focus, look at what they're paying attention to or focusing on. It doesn't have to be what's directly in front of you to be attentive or focused.
Okay. Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it becomes a learned
I
ability to.
right. Well, I did
Okay.
this whole big study on psychedelic music, LSD, DHT, and schizophrenia.
Oh,
And what
love it.
many people, oh yeah, I did a record called The Maladjusted of Mantino Asylum, and it was based on psychedelic music, which emulates LSD, which emulates DMT, which emulates schizophrenia. So it's kind of a long road, but the idea and the concept is that a rational man, when he's in a new environment, organizes his world so he can function in it. And schizophrenics could never seem to organize their world. So they suffer from what's called the housekeeper's dilemma. Every time the housekeeper cleans up the house, she turns around, it's a mess again. Well,
Yeah.
a lot of the schizophrenics claim that ghosts steal their thoughts or stealing their voice and what have you. And what some researchers just fairly recently, within the last 5 or 10 years, out of some pretty decent Ivy League schools, have started to speculate on in psychology, and something that I had focused on my study in is the idea is it's quite possible that schizophrenics are always one foot on each side of the veil. So they can never order their world that they're in because they're always flip-flopping between the living and the dead.
Mm. Now, do you think now? So this takes me to a whole kind of an interesting question. I didn't really think that this topic would go there, but that's exciting to me because just a minute backstory with that is I remember having always done paranormal investigations and parapsychological research. And then I worked as a psychiatric technician in a very, very amazingly haunted hospital in Kansas City, Missouri, down in the
Hmm.
kind of the West Bottoms area. And I remember some clients clearly schizophrenic or delusional or really struggling with mental illness. But then there were other clients that were seeing the same things that I was seeing on occasion and experiencing the same things that I would experience. And they'd say, oh, I don't want to go to the cafeteria. Like, I don't want to sit in the corner of the cafeteria. And a quote unquote normal person like myself, a mentally healthy person, would get a sense of something strange in that area and intuitively not want to go there. So it's kind of interesting to me I've always struggled with trying to mend those two together.
Hmm.
Um, because, the scientific community doesn't ever want to bring in the spirituality part of things, but do you think it's more a power of the mind and belief, or do you really think that there is a spiritual realm living among us, maybe just as a different wavelength?
Well, yeah, I consider the term mental health in itself a misnomer. It's almost an oxymoron because mental health in reality and historically speaking, especially, but even now in modern psychology, mental health is really more of a mental conformism.
Ugh, I love that. It is, but it's,
You know,
man, for the psychologists listening, I think we all say that at the watering hole, but we have to follow the DSM. We have
right?
to.
You follow the government-approved guidelines or the scientific
Right.
community-approved guidelines of what's healthy and what's not healthy and what's
Right.
normal and what's not normal.
And yet we're
I mean,
taking an oath that ethically we do no harm. And
right?
sometimes that
We do harm,
diagnosis is harming.
right?
Oh, I love that because it's a really strange conflict that I have that very few in the psychological community have it, but there are a large portion of people who do. They see it just as you said, that
Hmm.
it's a subjective pseudo way of a social construct, really, and it can be disheartening. So I want to jump back
Yeah,
to
so let's put it back into tinnitus or a
right,
situation with your son and
right.
people like us who have this particular structure of hearing. You know,
Well, well, and I have to mention because for my son, he will be hearing things when I'm not hearing things, noticing things that other people aren't noticing, and usually it's just curious. Usually it's just been those things where I'm like, huh, that's interesting. But it wasn't until I came upon the reason for that email to you, the fear frequency and the 19 hertz. And I'm wondering specifically if there is something to that, because, like you had said in the beginning, we're all subject to a large spectrum of wavelength. But what is it about that infrasound, or what is it about that spectrum 19 hertz to 18 hertz that seems to create, and it's only for some, it's not for everyone, which is why
right.
scientific publications have said, well, there's no correlation, there's no, definitive proof. And I kind of cringe because my son is
When
born
they
with
say definitive proof, what they mean is empirical proof. You
something that
know,
can be replicated, but it can't be for everyone.
right? And that's the thing is having science. I've always said a phenomena is a phenomena if you can document one occurrence of it. That's enough to qualify it as a phenomena by
Yeah.
definition. But scientific communities are so structured on empirical and empirical data, empirical research, and proof that if they can't replicate it and they can't get it under their control and fit it into their box or their construct of what normalcy is, then they completely disavow it.
Right. What a good word. That's such a good word for that. Because it is. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. I mean, I see some person, some living thing, just completely dangling there, and it's sad. It's a sad image, and it's a scary image, and I think especially when I think of like, well, with you or my father or people obviously that are close to me as my
Right.
firsthand example, um, it's really scary when I'm watching. And I'll have to send you the music files. I played them during the break just
Sure,
before bringing you
sure.
on. Um, my husband had created this very epic kind of sounding soundtrack for a Terry Brooks series, and we were so proud of it, and we were excited to share it over the Christmas holiday. And usually we would pass around headphones because, you make something in the studio, you want people to hear it in
Sure.
headphones. But there was enough people in the room, we just played it over the loudspeaker. And then my 3-year-old, who's just happily playing with his Star Wars toys, collapses to the floor and starts screaming bloody murder. And everyone's freaking out. We're wondering, like, because it's like he's in pain. He's in excruciating pain. And now that he can talk, he says, no, it's really scary. Turn it off, turn it off, turn it off. It's
Right.
scary. So I'm interested if you've ever had that experience with a particular wavelength that others aren't hearing. Because I learned that they put that
That is so
19
much to
hertz
talk about.
in
Yeah.
like horror movies and things.
Well, here's the thing. One of the things done in classical, well, first of all, let's digress from that. Sound is two characteristics of sound I want to bring out. One, all sound is waveform. All waveform is energy. Okay, so it's a frequency. It's a modulating waveform. So that's all that sound is. It's energy. Also, to point out also that sound is an observable phenomenon. In other words, does sound exist without a human to observe it, or an animal with ears? Without a set of ears to observe it, does sound exist?
Ooh. Yes, I
It,
would say
it,
yes.
but not as sound, it doesn't. It exists as energy, as waveform.
Oh.
So sound doesn't actually exist until there's an observer to translate that waveform, that energy, that pressure.
Wow.
You
That's really
see what I'm
deep,
saying?
Michael. That's really deep. That takes that
Yeah,
old tree falling in a forest to a whole new level.
right, exactly. And that's just the whole thing about it is so with that in mind, someone like your son is it possible that when you play the composition that your husband created, okay, in the studio, is it possible that he's getting a lot more information than a normal person? We only people normal hearing, quote unquote, normal hearing only picks up a certain frequency range. There's a range of frequencies between this level and that level, supposedly. But we still feel a lot of other frequency levels above and below that active hearing range that we don't, actively register as hearing. Maybe your son actually hears that. Maybe he hears sounds in his head. There's a famous, she just died not too long ago, a famous experimental musician. She did electronics and computer works. And she went on the ideas that in classical music, it's known that the frequencies they use in classical music create actual tones or sounds in your head that don't exist, that aren't in the music itself. And she would make these compositions, these electronic synthesizer computer compositions that would actually sound different to the listeners because it would actually create sounds in the listeners' heads that weren't
Ugh.
being played.
It's like taking the phantom tone, because
Exactly.
that's what my husband calls them. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
real term or not. The
That's
phantom
it's
tone
perfectly good. Yes.
to a
Yeah.
whole new level. Ooh, man.
So there are actually composers out there that did, from the 60s and 70s. There's some on YouTube, and I wish I could remember her name or the link without having to do some, I'm like just laying here chatting, but
Yeah, no
I
problem.
will send it to. I will send it to you. And she, what she focused on in her lectures, you can find them on YouTube. She's talking about these phantom music or phantom sounds, tones, if you will, that she creates by this music that, in balancing out the noise of the room, okay, the music playing through the room because the room is balanced to the music, to the actual sounds that she's creating. It creates tones in the listener's heads in that room that don't exist.
Wow.
Now, you've always heard of like sound engineers will pink out a room. They'll run pink noise, which is like white noise, but slightly
Right.
different, to absorb all the echo. Okay? So what they'll do is run pink noise for 20 minutes, and then when they record like a symphony or something, then they record it, and that pink noise that's floating around still absorbs that echo, and they get better recordings. Well, it's kind of the same thing. She would go into a room like 3 days before she'd have a concert or something, and she'd balance her equipment out to the sound of the room. Now, if your son heard that same piece of music that your husband created through headphones, is it possible that he wouldn't have the same response as he did in the open air room?
Right.
That's a test you should run.
Man, see, and that's where I was telling my husband, this. I was like, I want to see if this is that fear frequency they talk about, or I want to see what exactly he's fearful of, because we were trying to like take each stem that he may have added to that audio file,
Right.
because he does the piano and the guitar himself, but so much of the synthesizer is created through the stems that he creates and then puts
Right.
together, that I was like, we need to figure out which one it is. But there was
Or
so
what
many.
combination.
But then a part of me is like, wait a minute, this is my son. Like, I'm doing like, you know, Albert, and the conditioning, and the rat. Like, this is a horrible, horrible thing. But at the same time, for
No.
those psychologists listening out there, we are no longer allowed to do this kind of research because of, that it could be harmful. And the IRB doesn't let us. And even if it's a volunteer participant, we can't, Zimbardo, thank you for the Stanford prison experiment. We can't do that kind of thing anymore if it delivers any harm. And so, part of me is like, I shouldn't do that. But the other part of me is thinking, I want to learn more about this. I want to figure it out, because not only for learning more about my son and learning more about that concept, which I tried to Google it, and is it Gishi
Right.
Wiley? Does that sound familiar to you? Gishi Wiley?
Right.
Okay, so you'll find it later.
Wiley?
Yes, Wiley.
Yeah.
But anyway, but then I think about kind of how cool that is for the musicians out there who, my husband specifically, when he was doing this piece for the Shannara, he grew up
Right.
listening to that and reading those tales. He's got all the books and all the
Oh,
autographs.
nice.
And, like that was his J.R.R. Tolkien, And
Right.
so when
Right.
he sat down to compose these stories, he was like, I'm seeing it and I'm visualizing it. And for anybody who maybe has read this series, they know exactly what part of the book this is. They know exactly what the character is going through. And so then you take someone like my son who has no idea. Like, is there a part of like the soul imprint or the psyche imprint that, my husband's not hearing these waves, but maybe he is intuitively putting something in there as he's composing. Maybe musicians are doing that when it's one of those songs like Hotel California, or like Eric Clapton does so often, I think, with these musicians that are putting a part of themselves into the music. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Oh, well, yeah. I mean,
It
I
makes me
grew up
wonder.
on industrial and experimental music my entire life. So,
Ugh,
I was listening to, the Stranger Lennon stuff and Frank Zappa and
yeah.
Kraftwerk and Einstürzen and Neubauten and the whole gamut of experimental and different music. I mean, I didn't like what was mainstream because it didn't do anything for me. But when I would listen to, some of the stranger Kraftwerk pieces, or some of the stranger industrial pieces like Soviet France or Einstürzen Neubauten from Germany, using pieces of metal and
Right.
saws and stuff to make their music, I would actually literally enjoy that like someone would enjoy normal music, and for me it gave me more.
How fantastic. I think for anyone listening, man, it really opens up. It's kind of one of those like sit back epiphany moments when you really think about all that is meaningful and all that goes into what we are as a being and all the energy around us and kind of the manipulation and intent of that energy and how it affects us and how the stimulus may or may not be something that science tells us exists or that another person is seeing. Because that's so often, I hear people when they say, you know, I don't see it that way. And I talk about the importance of perception for what I do in forensic psychology. So much of it is perception. I'm always talking about perception, but I think when you bring in wavelengths, when you bring in the spectrum of sound, because I'm always, when I'm thinking of sound, I'm thinking of the human spectrum. I'm not thinking of infrasound. I'm not thinking of, phantom sounds. I'm not even, and that's a shame on me because after talking with you and after tonight's show, I feel so bad because just watching my son, I mean, there's clearly a lot going on there that that I'm not seeing, that I'm open-minded to it. I'm sitting right next to him in the fetal position trying to figure out what it is, but I just don't hear it. But it doesn't mean that it's not there.
Yeah, you just don't sell him short. Give him credit where credit's due.
Right.
It's when you used to run a bath for your son, and you put him in a bathtub, and you say, "Is this too hot or is this too cold? Is this too hot or is this too cold?" And you would adjust the waters.
Yeah.
That's not torture. I mean, that's exactly what you'd be doing with these tests. This is no different. I mean, you know what I mean?
See,
You
no, that's true, though. That's true.
don't coddle him. I mean, he's a when I was a kid, I mean, one of the favorite things, I was just laying here thinking about when I would, be laying in bed at night. One of my favorite things, I lived near Highway 20 in Portage when I grew up, and I would be able to listen to the semis, like a single semi, with its tires against the asphalt, just screaming through the night, down the highway. I would listen to the it coming up and the Doppler effect of it going past and then winding down the road. And I would just get such joy and pleasure out of hearing that. You'd think I was listening to a symphony, and I would just listen to it. I'd stay awake and listen to it all night long.
I love that. And now it's interesting because we're not talking about, like when I was kind of reading about the 18 to 19 hertz and the infrasound and the engineer Vic Tandy, I think was his name,
Mm-hmm. With
seeing this link with the fan in the
right,
laboratory.
in the laboratory.
Right. And that was a really great visual for me that I guess I had never thought of before. For those of you listening, people thinking the laboratory was haunted, and he was like, this is ridiculous. But then one night he noticed that there was a bend in one of the propellers of the fan, and it was creating this very low humming, this vibration that created a physical effect for some. But that sound that most people are just not even paying attention to, when the lights go down in the laboratory and everyone's gone and you hear it, it's this phenomenon, almost this thing. And I thought that was an interesting way to visualize it, because I think of you talking about the semis, and I don't think it's like a soothing, like how many people like that white noise or that fan. They're like, oh, I can't go to sleep without a fan going over me. Maybe to some it's soothing, or to another person, that's the only thing that they can hear, and it's extremely annoying.
Well, see, that's the thing with Vic Tandy. I've always wondered if that's Vic Tandy from Tandy Core, with the Radio Shack.
I bet it is.
I bet it is, because there was a Vic Tandy too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
From Tandy Corporation. But anyway, with Vic and the whole thing, is he always claimed it was a physical effect. And my question is, well, what if it's not a physical effect, but only a physical observation? In other words, what if the oscillation of the fan, the bent propeller on the fan, was creating a frequency that wasn't creating a physical effect on the human being, but what if it was allowing for physical observation of a human being? In other words, instead of being hit by the window, it was opening the window.
Ooh.
So what if
the skeleton key, if you will?
Right. Instead of being a malady or something that could be expressed in scientifically acceptable terms. What if that frequency was really what it was doing was acting as an antenna or a open door for an observation that wouldn't normally be available? It's like your research on binaural hearing.
Yeah.
I just got done doing a workshop at a Ghost conference where we built a binaural recording device out of a wig head and a couple recorders, just sort of a poor man's version. But with the whole, it was fun. The whole concept is when I capture electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, one of the things me and other people have noticed, it doesn't seem to have a point of reference. There's no echolocation to it. And of course, from your studies on binaural hearing, is our hearing works like our sight. We see in 3 dimensions because our eyes are set at a certain space apart, and we see in 2 different directions, and it creates 3-dimensional viewing. Where a person with one eye eventually fades into after his memory of 3-dimensional sight fails, and he becomes to see in 2 dimensions. Now, with hearing and listening, our one ear picks up the original sound source, and our second ear picks up the echo, and we get echolocation from that. In other words, we close our eyes and we can tell where sound is coming from just from the fact that we have 2 ears and they're spaced a certain amount apart. Now, with that, in EVP, there is no original sound source because it's only modulation of energy or microsound.
Right, it's not vocal cords that are being vibrated.
Right. It's atmospheric energy or molecules being manipulated. And so it doesn't create an original sound source, but what it does create is just simply the echo. So we're only capturing one feature of what we normally hear as a sound. And so when we capture it, we compress these granular clouds of microsounds pieces together. We're only capturing this echo created by this atmospheric pressure or energy being reflected off another surface. So we get no echolocation from it at all, so we can't tell where it's coming from. It sounds like it's coming from everywhere all at once.
Man, I can't help but think of like Anonymous or people who today, in this day and age, they know enough about technology that they can make an IP address untraceable because the source is so important to the intent.
Source is everything. And with that, we're exactly where I wanted us to be. When you see someone doing an observation of something, you were talking about observations. Now, observations come from a point of view.
Right, a perception of that person.
And that comes from where? That comes from exactly one point in place. So in other words, for someone to observe something, they have to be literally in a stationary mode. They have to be at one given spot at one point in time to have an observation of one event.
Man. Michael, my mind is just so happy. It's like an old ping-pong game in Atari, just going on high speed. Because I want to think, I want to ask you about, the double slit experiment. I want to ask you how you feel about, the observation theory and how you think that pertains to spiritual energy and maybe, what music is all about. And just, I have so many questions, but we're already at the top of our hour, so what I want, isn't that how it goes? But that's good, though, because that creates a momentum, and hopefully my listeners, I know that they are just as perplexed and excited and pumped up as I am. Where can we find you? Because I want a copy of every lecture you've ever done. I'm really upset that I've not been at these things that you're doing because I would just be salivating. I'm so excited to hear that you're doing these experiments, and I want to know where you are next, where I can find you, where can I stalk Michael Esposito?
If you type my name in and EVP after it on Google, you'll find a plethora of my lectures and stuff that people have recorded over the years. Also, you'll find records and stuff that I got out, And the thing about my records is most of my records, or and we were just talking about point of view, is based on phenomenology. In other words, actually the event within the environment of the event. Okay, so I capture the EVPs. I also capture the sounds of the room, the floors, the walls, or wherever I'm at. And I build the compositions, the actual something you could listen to and enjoy as you would a soundtrack or a movie score in the context of the actual voices of unknown origin that were captured there. So,
So
but
you're
anyway,
just,
there's also,
man, that's just crazy.
yeah.
It's just crazy. I think of the difference of just looking at a fish tank in the dentist office and then being at the aquarium and putting your head in that bubble and standing up in the aquarium and looking around. You're looking at fish, but it's just it's such a better experience. Okay. So anyway, go ahead. Where were you taking
on
us?
on on Facebook, if you go, I have a label that we need a label boss of mine, friend of mine in Germany, put together a label for um, records and stuff that, for whatever reason, could never be produced as a record or whatever the difficulties with people or what have you. But we made them all free downloads. And if you go to Lost Patrol Records on Facebook, you can download. I think there's 3 albums up there right now, and like one of them is with Chris Connolly, who was a singer for Ministry and the Revolting Cocks, industrial singer, and Ursula Bielski, the writer from Chicago, of course, and Lee Felgren, a sound artist from Stockholm, a good friend of mine. We did an album based on Krampus a couple years ago.
No way,
And,
the evil Christmas spirit.
Right. It's called the Krampus Nacht Tales, Cautionary Tales for Children. And I wrote a bunch of cautionary tales and did some EVP recordings and the actual sounds, and based on the idea of Krampus visits. And built it to great. If you download it, you can get the free book and photographs. We found a bunch of old photographs of children that related to the actual cautionary tales. So it's really cool. It's great. Christmas
So
fun.
cool. For those of you sitting at home doing nothing, stop what you're doing, and because the show's over, I give you permission. Go and check out Lost Patrol Records. I'm on it right now. And Michael Esposito, I'm going to be sending you out in my newsletter for those of you listening, on my social sites for those of you who are in the Matrix doing that sort of thing, because I really think the information that you have is important. I think that it's extremely special in a way that we should all empathize with it. It absolutely matters, and I'm so honored to have you on the show. And
Oh, it's my pleasure. Anytime. I love you,
Michael.
anytime. Absolutely.
Man, I'm just fist pumping the air right now. I'm so excited. So, anyway, so I'm going to be touching base with you on some emails. Have a wonderful new year. And for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, Mysteries of the Mind.